I was clutching the cardboard box of dishes in my arms when I realized the courier wasn't leaving. He stood there awkwardly in the narrow hallway, a thick manila envelope in his hand with my name scrawled on the front. "Lease paperwork?" he asked. Relief washed over me until I ripped it open. Inside were 2 contracts, already stamped, except the name typed under tenant wasn't mine anymore. Someone had crossed it out in black ink and written his name over it, right above my signature. My ex-stepfather's handwriting, unmistakable. My chest turned hollow. He wasn't even my stepfather anymore. Their divorce papers had been finalized years ago. Yet somehow, he had found his way back into the one place I thought was safe. My first apartment. This lease was supposed to be the marker that I was finally on my own, carving a space no one could invade, not after the years under his constant supervision. And now, the proof was staring at me that he'd managed to insert himself again, cutting my name out of the life I was trying to build. I dropped the dishes on the bare wooden floor, porcelain clinking. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, staring at the slashes of black pen on the lease. My throat felt dry. For a split second, I wondered if maybe it was an office mistake. Paperwork errors happen, right? But the handwriting was his. Precise, jagged, the same way he used to label boxes in the garage with permanent marker, claiming territory. The image burned me. Him at his desk, rifling through documents that weren't his anymore, correcting my identity like I was still a child under his authority. Anger rose faster than logic. My neighbors poked their heads into the hallway, curious about the raised voice. I just closed the door on them before they could ask. I leaned against the wall, breathing hard, staring down at the envelope. I tried to convince myself maybe it wasn't personal. Maybe he had to authorize something connected to my late mother's estate, some leftover tie that hadn't been severed. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a clerical error. He was erasing me, hijacking my independence before it could even begin. And the worst part? The delivery slip inside made it clear. These corrections were already processed. Paperwork had gone through. If you think this was just a petty scrawl on a lease, wait until you hear how far he had already set the trap. Shall I write the next chapter? When I finally pulled myself off the floor, the apartment around me felt less like a sanctuary and more like a crime scene. The walls were still bare, the smell of fresh paint sharp in the air, but instead of excitement, I felt dread curling up inside me. This apartment had been more than just a rental. It was supposed to be a promise I made to myself after a year of couch hopping, after nights spent folding myself onto my cousin's pull-out bed, after admitting out loud that I couldn't keep circling back to my mother's house like a runaway teenager. I would have my own set of keys, my own name on the lease, and no one looking over my shoulder. But now, because of him, that promise was already cracked. I should explain. He hadn't been my legal stepfather for almost 3 years, not since my mom finally divorced him. And my mom, she's gone now. Cancer took her last spring. He never had kids of his own. I was the closest thing he pretended to a daughter. That's what made it easier for him to manipulate the estate she left behind. Because even after their divorce, he wasn't forced to cut himself off from managing certain accounts, the ones still tied to her name. My mom hadn't finished untangling the paperwork before she passed, and suddenly he was trustee of things he should never have touched. When I confronted him about it at the memorial, he'd put a hand on my shoulder and given me that patronizing smile. "It's just paperwork, sweetheart. I'll handle it." I wanted to scream at him then, but my aunts were right there, whispering how responsible he was, how he'd been the only one to keep things running while my mom was sick. So I swallowed it. And now, here it was again. Him handling things. On the contract for the first physical space that was supposed to belong to me alone. Walking across the empty apartment, every step echoed too loudly. My savings had gone into this move. Deposit, furniture delivery scheduled, electricity already in my name. If this apartment slipped away, I couldn't just sign somewhere else next week. The housing market was brutal, and this place was one of the only affordable ones near my job. Losing it would mean months of limbo again. I sat on the sole folding chair I'd bought and spread the lease across my lap. My name had been there before. I'd filled out the application personally, met the landlord myself, which meant he must have inserted himself after the fact, rewriting the record so official channels would see me as a dependent, an extension of him, someone who didn't get to stand alone. The more I stared at his handwriting, the more my throat tightened. He wasn't even my stepfather anymore, but to him apparently that didn't matter. Control didn't need a title. I told myself I'd fight this. I'd prove the lease was rightfully mine. But when I looked at the stamped copy, one question gnawed at me. How many other people already believed his version of the story? And when I found out how he'd staged his little corrections in plain sight, it all spiraled faster than I expected. Shall I write the next chapter? The first sign that he wasn't going to stop at paperwork came quietly, almost too quietly to notice. It was a Wednesday morning, the day my movers were scheduled. I rushed downstairs to meet them, only to find him already standing by the truck in the parking lot. Smiling, hands in his pockets, as if he'd orchestrated the entire thing. I told them to bring the boxes to storage for now, he said, his tone casual. You don't want to crowd your new space right away, do you? At first, it sounded reasonable enough, but then I caught sight of my boxes stacked in the wrong place, his SUV already half filled with my things. He'd directed the movers away from my apartment door entirely. I didn't ask you to do anything, I snapped, voice shaking. These are going upstairs. The movers hesitated, their eyes darting between us like children caught between feuding parents. And that's exactly how he wanted it, to frame me as the emotional one, while he played the calm, guiding hand. Sweetheart, relax, he said smoothly. This is for your own good. Trust me. Once you've lived in a place a few months, you'll see it's smarter to keep some of your things under family care. Easier. Family care. The words twisted inside me like thorns. My mother had said those very words while handing him access to her accounts. How many times had he turned practical help into control? How many times had I brushed it aside to keep the peace? No, not this time. I walked right up to the mover carrying my box of dishes, pressed my hands against the cardboard. Upstairs, I ordered firmly. Apartment 2B. My voice cracked but didn't break. For a breathless second, I thought he might physically stop me, and maybe he considered it. But instead, he chuckled low in his throat. She's independent now, he told the movers like it was a punchline. Let's see how long that lasts. By the time we got the boxes into my bare living room, my nerves were shredded. A petty incident, maybe. But that's how it always began with him. Small humiliations, little gestures disguised as help, each one carving away a sliver of confidence until I couldn't recognize who was right anymore. That night, sitting between unopened boxes, I caught myself wondering if maybe he wasn't wrong, if maybe I was being dramatic. But then my eyes drifted to the forged lease copy lying on the counter. My name crossed out. His name in that jagged script. The thought hit me like a punch. He wasn't just sabotaging me out of habit. He was intentionally rewriting my life before it even started. And when I finally confronted him about the lease directly, the way he twisted my words left me questioning my own sanity. Shall I write the next chapter? When I finally confronted him about the lease, it didn't go the way I had planned in my head. I had rehearsed every word walking down the hallway to his condo. Fire in my chest, folder of paperwork in my hand, ready to prove I wasn't some dependent child he could shuffle around. But the moment he opened the door, leaning casually against the frame in his pressed shirt, I felt the ground shift. He looked at me the way he always had, like he was already 3 steps ahead. "I know what you did to the contract," I blurted out. My voice sounded too thin, but I didn't let myself stop. "You crossed my name off the lease. You're trying to take over. Why?" He blinked, slow, deliberate, before laughing softly. "Oh God, is that what this is about? Sweetheart, you're imagining mistakes into malice again." "No," I snapped. "Your handwriting is right there." "Really?" He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Paperwork goes through 100 hands. I mean, do you really think the world revolves around you? That a leasing office doesn't make clerical errors without some grand conspiracy tied to your name? You're too sensitive. Always were." That sentence froze me, because he knew exactly what it would do. Push me back into that corner of self-doubt. He always did it this way. Same tone, same rhythm. First dismiss, then diminish. Soon I'd be the one explaining myself, apologizing, questioning my own memory. But this time, I refused to collapse. "Don't insult me," I said tightly, pulling out the copy from the envelope. "This is your handwriting. Everybody knows it." He glanced at it, shrugged. "So it looks similar. That's not proof. And even if I had gotten involved, don't you think maybe it's because I care? I mean, you jumping into adulthood without a safety net? You'll crash. You always do. I'm trying to save you from yourself. But you'll spin anything into control, won't you? And the worst part?" He threw it out there so smoothly, I almost wished it were true. That maybe this was just his misguided way of caring. Because if it wasn't, if it really was deliberate manipulation, that meant I had nobody protecting me anymore. He tilted his head, eyes sharp behind the softness of his voice. "You've been telling everyone I'm sabotaging you?" "I hope not, because when you melt down like this in front of cops or leasing boards, you'll look unstable. And do you want that reputation following you around?" The words lodged like barbed wire. My heart pounded in my ears. If he framed me as ungrateful, hysterical, dramatic, how many would believe his version first? They always had before. I took the paper back before he could touch it, my hands trembling. "You don't get to rewrite me out of my own home," I whispered. He smirked like it was already too late. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, he pulled his next move in front of an audience, where I couldn't hide, and where the humiliation would be carved deep into everyone's memory. Shall I write the next chapter? The next time I saw him, it wasn't behind closed doors. It was in the leasing office, in full view of the property manager and her assistant. I'd gone there to finalize the last step, signing the official lease agreement, the version that would secure my apartment once and for all. My hands were clammy but determined as I sat across the walnut desk, documents neatly stacked, pen ready. I thought I was finally ahead of him. Halfway through the meeting, the glass door swung open. And there he was. My ex-stepfather strolled in like he owned the place, greeting the manager by her first name, as if they were old friends. He carried a folder under his arm, thick with papers. My stomach churned. The manager glanced between us in confusion. "Oh, I didn't realize you both would be here." Before I could correct her, he smoothly placed the folder on the table and slid out a new set of forms. "I have the corrected paperwork right here. It was a clerical error that listed her as the sole tenant. This," he tapped the top page with his finger, "is the finalized contract." I froze. My name was gone completely. In its place was his, Alexander Moore, printed boldly, neatly. He was listed as primary tenant. Next to that, occupant, dependent. That was me. I could barely breathe. "That's not true," I blurted, my voice breaking. "I applied. I paid the deposit. All of it is under my account." I scrambled to pull out my receipts, proof of my bank transfer. My fingers shook as I spread the statements across the desk. The manager raised her eyebrows, but didn't pick any of the papers up. She watched us like she was stuck refereeing a messy custody battle. "This is unusual," she said faintly, and that was exactly where he thrived, in the gray air of confusion. He leaned back in his chair, calm. "She's emotional. You understand," he told the manager. "Her mother just passed this year. I've been handling her affairs. She doesn't quite grasp the legal side yet, and it causes her distress. I wouldn't want you to feel pressured by an outburst." Outburst. The word echoed, and I felt eyes on me. The assistant glancing nervously. The manager sighing like this was drama she hadn't signed up for. I leaned forward, desperate, my palms flat on the table. "He's lying. He doesn't even live with me anymore. He has no right." But he cut me off with a patronizing laugh. "Do you see what I mean?" It was unbearable, the way he twisted reality right in front of witnesses until I sounded like some unhinged young woman clinging to delusions. The manager finally cleared her throat and said we'd need time to sort it out. Her neutral tone a polite way of saying she was no longer sure who was telling the truth. I stumbled out of there, trembling, humiliated. I'd walked in confident, holding proof, and somehow he had still managed to flip the narrative. Strangers now thought I was unstable. And that night, when I tried to fix the mess the logical way, I realized he had closed off every possible path before I even reached it. Shall I write the next chapter? I barely slept that night. By morning, I was on the phone with the leasing office, demanding they review my bank records, my application, anything that tied the apartment to me. The woman on the other end sounded polite but strained, like she'd been briefed already. "These matters have to be handled through proper channels. We can't take verbal requests." Proper channels. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what that meant. He had already filed paperwork that made me invisible. Still, I forced myself to go down in person. I carried my entire folder of documents, my pay stubs, the deposit receipt, copies of my emails with the office. I spread them across the rental desk like ammunition, speaking as clearly as I could. But the manager only shook her head and pointed to the note on her system. It said, "Primary tenant on file, Alexander Moore. Dependent occupant permitted. My name." I felt my knees weaken. This is insane. How could he even make changes like that? She hesitated. He submitted an amendment as guardian of residual estate assets. He presented notarized paperwork. Legally, it matched our requirements. Guardian. The word spat acid in my throat. My mom's unfinished estate. He was exploiting it, twisting it into leverage. On paper, I wasn't fully independent. I was a dependent under the jurisdiction of her lingering estate, which he still claimed to administer. I pulled up my phone to show her the deposit transaction from my account, highlighted my name. She pursed her lips, sympathetic but unmoved. "I can't override a notarized amendment with an email receipt. If you want it corrected, you'll need legal representation." Legal representation. That might as well have been the same as saying, "good luck." I didn't have the money for a lawyer. My savings had gone into this move. I walked out of that office shaking, clutching my useless papers to my chest. It was like I had vanished from my own life. On record, I didn't exist without him. And that's when I realized there was no way this was coincidence, no harmless clerical twist. He had thought it through. He had shut every obvious door, planted his narrative before I even knew it existed. I couldn't prove anything to strangers because, on paper, he owned me. Again. I cried in the stairwell, the sound muffled by the concrete walls. If I couldn't fight him with reputation, paperwork, logic, what was left? The universe answered the next morning in the form of an envelope slipped under my door by mistake. What was inside almost made me vomit, because there it was, undeniable proof of how he'd been orchestrating this whole fraud. Shall I write the next chapter? The envelope lay half crumpled on the floor just inside my apartment door, slipped under sometime while I was curled on the futon pretending to sleep. At first, I thought it was junk mail, the kind with fake gold seals and pretend urgency. But then I saw the return address, a notary office across town. My breath caught. I knelt on the cold floor and tore it open with shaky fingers. Inside was a letter, printed on stiff cream paper, stamped and initialed at the bottom. My eyes skimmed the first lines, then froze. It was addressed to my building's property manager. Attached was a PDF copy of a cohabitation agreement. In it, my name was listed, not as a tenant, not even as an independent signer, but as a dependent cohabitant. Worse, the form claimed that I had consented to this arrangement. The room tilted. My signature was scrawled across the page. Except it wasn't mine. It was a clumsy but frighteningly close forgery. My stomach turned as I ran my finger over the ink, searching for differences. The too wide loop in the A of my name, the heavy-handed downward stroke. It wasn't my hand. But to a property manager who didn't know me? It could pass. And then there was the wording. I read the lines over and over, the blood in my veins roaring louder with each pass. The occupant, my name, agrees to dwell under the guardianship and dependency terms provided by Alexander Moore until such time as independent housing maturity is established. Housing maturity. The phrasing was absurd, infantilizing, like I was a teenager incapable of responsibility. Whoever drafted this had done so deliberately to strip me of credibility. I pressed the paper to my chest like it could stop my heart from bursting out. Here it was, the proof, the very thing I needed. He had gone so far as to falsify my consent, using my mother's estate as a smokescreen, stamping my adulthood as a temporary privilege. He managed. But then the fear sank in. If this letter had been sent to the building manager and accepted, what else had he planted? How many other versions of my agreement existed out there that I hadn't seen yet? What would happen if I screamed forgery, but couldn't make them hear me? I stared at the stamped notarial initial at the bottom, bile rising in my throat. If this was notarized, someone had either been tricked or bought. The shaking in my hands turned to fire. I couldn't keep reacting while he wrote the story of my life. I had to flip the narrative. I had to build a case against him so concrete that even his calm gaslighting and fake signatures couldn't bury the truth. But the risk terrified me. To call him out publicly meant I'd be burning bridges that connected me to everything my mother left behind. Still, when I looked again at that forged signature, my name butchered under his control, I knew silence wasn't an option anymore. The moment had come where I had to gather my proof and make a stand, no matter what it cost me. Shall I write the next chapter? I pressed the forged document flat against my little folding table, staring at it until the words blurred. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Fear had been in the driver's seat for months, maybe years. Fear of being dismissed, fear of losing my mom's memory, fear of his influence stretching longer than his marriage ever should have allowed. But now, rage started to take its place. Rage with a clarity I didn't know lived in me. The envelope wasn't a curse. It was my weapon. For once, he'd slipped up. A letter meant for the property office had landed in my lap, and, along with it, the key to unraveling him. I spent the next 2 nights hunched over my laptop, combing through every email thread, every text message he'd ever sent me about household responsibilities. He always framed them like he was still my guardian. I'll sign off on your bank transfer. Don't worry about calling the utility company. I'll keep the account in my name for now. At the time, I'd brushed them aside as just him sticking his nose where it didn't belong. But now, pieced together, they showed a pattern. Constant positioning as if my adulthood was provisional, pending his approval. I built an evidence folder, screenshots, scans, the PDF of the fraudulent notarized letter I'd found, my actual bank statement showing the original lease deposit coming directly from my account, a screenshot of the text message from the moving day when he redirected my boxes. No rush. You can ease into independence slowly. It made me sick to reread, but every detail mattered. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with unanswered calls from him. He must have realized the letter had missed its destination. At one point, he texted, "I hope you're not panicking. These are safeguards, not attacks. You'll understand when you're older." The phrasing made my skin crawl. How much older did I need to be before I wasn't his dependent? 40? 50? Dead. By the end of the week, my folder was thick enough to feel like armor. But carrying it also meant accepting that I wasn't just protecting a lease. I was putting my last tie to him, and in a way, to my mother's estate, on the chopping block. If I dragged him into the light, it would mean leaving behind the tiny security net of family he pretended to represent. It was one of the hardest choices I've ever made, but I couldn't stay buried under forged signatures and whispered insinuations. Not again. If the price of standing up was setting fire to every illusion of stability he offered, then so be it. So I made the call, to the building board directly, requesting a tenant hearing. I told them there was forged documentation being circulated in my name, and that I had proof to present. The woman's pause on the other end was heavy, but finally she agreed. They'd hold a meeting in the apartment lobby that weekend. As soon as I hung up, my stomach flipped. Every muscle felt wound tight. I had less than 3 days to gather my courage. And when we all sat across from each other in that fluorescent-lit lobby, there would be no shadows for him to twist reality in. The breaking point had come. If I failed, I wouldn't just lose my apartment. I'd lose my name entirely. Shall I write the next chapter? The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights above buzzed like nervous thoughts I couldn't quiet. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle, and at the far side, the building's property manager sat with 2 board members flanking her, all with clipboards balanced on their knees. My throat was sandpaper. I clutched the leather folder I'd prepared all week. Every screenshot, every receipt, every forged page. It felt like a shield, though it weighed like a stone. And then, as if he'd choreographed his own entrance, my ex-stepfather strolled in, carrying his ever-present portfolio, polished and controlled. He greeted the board by name. His confidence was suffocating. "Thank you all for meeting," the manager began carefully. "We've received conflicting documentation concerning the lease at Unit 2B. Both parties are present, and we'll hear each side." He went first. Of course. His voice was smooth, reassuring. He painted me as a grieving young woman, rushing toward independence and stumbling over legal realities. He spoke slowly, to appear deliberate, careful, a man burdened with keeping fragile family affairs in order. "She doesn't realize," he said, looking at me with mock sadness, "that she's still protected under guardianship provisions connected to her mother's estate. It's not a punishment. It's a safeguard until her financial foundations stabilize. This property can't in good conscience sign her as sole tenant when her dependency is formally declared." The board members scribbled notes. For a second, I thought I saw sympathy in one of their eyes. My skin crawled. When it was my turn, my chair scraped the tile too loudly. My voice shook at first, but I forced myself to lay document after document on the table. Bank statements in my name, printed confirmation emails from the property's own office showing my account number and deposit. Screenshots of texts where he referred to me as dependent. The notarized letter with my forged signature placed at the very top. "This is fraud," I whispered, then said it again louder. "This is fraud." The manager leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "This signature, you're saying it isn't yours?" "It's not," I said, forcing them to look at me. "I never signed anything naming myself a dependent. That letter claims I agreed to live under his guardianship. I didn't. He forged it." Finally, I saw one of the board members' expressions shift. Doubt, even discomfort, flickered. My ex-stepfather's face tensed for the briefest second before he recovered, lips shaping an indulgent smile. "She's distraught," he said softly to them. "I understand this is embarrassing for her." But then I pulled out the last piece. My phone, lit up with the time-stamped screenshots of his messages. On the screen glowed the words he'd texted me. "These are safeguards, not attacks. You'll understand when you're older." For the first time, his smirk faltered. The room went still. The board members leaned in closer. "This doesn't read like protection," one of them murmured. "This reads like control." And in that breath, I knew the balance was shifting. For once, I wasn't choking in the cage of his narrative. But I didn't yet understand how brutal the fallout would be once the board sided with me. His calm mask might have cracked, but the war outside that room was just beginning. Shall I write the next chapter? The decision came down fast and sharp, like a gavel, even though no one banged one. One of the board members cleared her throat and said, "At this point, we can't ignore the evidence of inconsistent documents. The original proof of payment, from your account, is valid, and the signature on this letter." She tapped 2 pages together. "My real bank receipt versus the fake notarized form doesn't match. For our purposes, the lease remains in your name." My knees went weak. Relief flooded me so hard I nearly burst into tears, but I kept my face steady. Across the circle, I saw him, my ex-stepfather, grip his portfolio so tightly his knuckles whitened. Calm, polished, but something snapping under that veneer. The meeting adjourned. That should have been the end. I should have walked out victorious, keys in hand, and never looked back. But as soon as we stepped into the hallway away from the board members, he leaned in close, his voice low and poisonous enough to freeze me mid-step. "You think you won something in there?" he hissed. His smile stayed painted for the lobby cameras, but his eyes were ice. "You embarrassed me. You painted me like a fraud in front of strangers. You've just made this personal." I swallowed hard, but didn't respond. I refused to give him the satisfaction. By the time I got back upstairs, my phone buzzed furiously. Emails about unauthorized storage access, notices about changed logins for the estate archive my mother had left, even a message from the storage facility I used for some of my mom's furniture. "Per authorized request, your access has been revoked at this time." My chest caved in. He was cutting me off, one cord at a time, pulling back everything he still had the reach to control. I had won the apartment, but the price was suddenly clear. He was going to scorch everything else he touched, from my mom's heirlooms in storage to connections with family friends who, I knew, would already be hearing his version of the public meltdown I'd supposedly had. I sat on the floor, laptop open, reading and rereading the revocations as they came in, each one like a tiny guillotine. Independence, yes, but isolation too. The first wave of panic almost undid me. Was a home worth all this destruction? Had I triggered something irreparable by refusing to stay quiet? But then I looked around my apartment. Still bare walls, but mine. The empty shelves waiting for my books. The quiet hall outside that didn't carry his footsteps. For the first time, the silence belonged to me. I whispered out loud, I'd rather lose everything else than let him own me again. I don't even know if I believed it yet, but saying it made the walls feel taller, steadier. So yes, the fallout was cruel, but the reversal had already happened. The board believed me. The lease was mine. And now, the question wasn't what he would take next. It was how I would rebuild, knowing he'd try to haunt me from every corner left in his grasp. Shall I write the next chapter? The night after the board meeting, I lit a single lamp in the living room and just sat there on the floor, surrounded by unopened boxes. Relief felt like smoke. Thin, temporary. The apartment was legally mine now, yes, but it came paired with the bitter taste of everything he'd already taken. My phone kept buzzing with family messages. My aunt sent a clipped text. "He says you attacked him in front of strangers. Is that true?" Another relative wrote, "Sweetie, you can't burn bridges when he's the one safeguarding what your mom left. Be careful." Safeguarding. They were already repeating his language. My fury spiked and broke into tears I couldn't hold back anymore. But then I remembered the proof folder. For the first time in years, I had documents and words that weren't just my memory against his. The forged signature, the patronizing texts, the bank receipts. He could twist family sympathy, but he couldn't erase hard evidence anymore. So I started writing. At 2 a.m, hunched over a cheap desk I hadn't even unpacked, I compiled a timeline of every single manipulation he'd run since Mom got sick. Dates, messages, copies. I didn't know what I'd use it for yet, but recording it felt like clawing back strength I didn't know I had. The following morning, I walked through my apartment slowly, touching walls, touching windowsills, reminding myself, this is mine. Not because he allowed it, not because he blessed it, because I fought for it. For once, no one could cross my name off and write his instead. The silence, the emptiness, the thin curtains, all of it looked like a monument to what it had cost me. Freedom meant distance from heirlooms, maybe from family, maybe from every source of money or storage access he could shut off. But standing in my own space, I finally understood. Home isn't just about what's inside it. It's about the borders you defend. I hadn't just signed a lease. I had drawn a line. From that day, I decided, no more half steps. No more letting him narrate my story for relatives, lawyers, or managers. Whatever I lost in the process, I would no longer belong to him. Not legally, not emotionally. It was terrifying, but it was mine. And in claiming this apartment, I claimed something bigger. The right to my own name, unedited, untied, and uncrossed out.